Hey everybody, and welcome to my video on this, the Zeiss Ikon Continamatic II. Continamatic II. This is a viewfinder type camera, and what that means is it has a single viewfinder and no mechanism within the camera to help you gauge the distance from your camera to your subject. It has an aperture and ISO coupled scene meter. This is the light meter right here, and it gauges the light of the entire scene. This camera has an aperture and shutter speed linked scene meter. Here's your light meter, and when you adjust your shutter speed or aperture, this adjusts along with it. It has shutter speeds of bulb and then 1 second to 1/300th of a second. It has 100% viewfinder frame coverage on all three of the lenses available for this camera. That's right, it is an interchangeable lens viewfinder camera. And the flash on this camera syncs via a PC port. And if you have a modern or electronic flash, that will work on this camera. Any flash you could buy in a store today will work on this camera, and it will sync at any shutter speed. When this camera was released, the target market was high-end for amateur camera users. So this is a very good camera for somebody's first camera, and it's a high-end option for that first camera. It's not a rangefinder, so that you would have to estimate your distance to the subject or use this as a point and shoot, which I'll show you how to do later in this video. And when this came out, SLRs were still for professionals and rich eccentrics with more money than sense. There were not that many SLRs in the late 1950s that were accessible or affordable to average photographers. So viewfinders back then were the entry-level cameras. So consider this the iPhone or smartphone or Android phone, whatever you want to call it, of its time in photographic terms. And it was a high-end model, so it would have been like the best smartphone you can buy, only just a camera. Obviously, it's not also a phone. This was made by Zeiss Ikon in 1958 and 1959 only in Germany. It was preceded directly by the Contina II and made concurrently with the Contina 1A, 1C, 3, 2, and Continamatic III. And then it was followed by nothing. The Continamatic III stemmed from the Contina III, and this camera represents the end of the line for the mid-range Continamatic and Contina series. So if you have your Contina, let's take a look at the features on the camera. And we're going to start up here on the top and then go around the camera and see what everything is. Now, the first thing is normally we start with the camera strap lugs, but this doesn't have camera strap lugs. It came with a leather case, and the case is what the camera strap attached to. And it had a thin leather band for the camera strap, most all of which of those have disintegrated at this point. I was lucky enough to pick this up with the camera strap, and a couple years after I got it, I was wearing it, and the strap just snapped while it was around my neck. Fortunately, I caught the camera so that it didn't fall onto the ground. But one thing to bear in mind with this is that if you get one with an old leather camera strap, they are prone to just breaking at any moment, so you shouldn't trust them to be the strap you use to carry your camera. So here's the camera top, and we're going to go over and look at what all of these buttons are, and in a little bit we'll talk about how to use them for your photography. So here we have the film rewind knob. This is the film indicator type dial, and this is not connected to your camera's aperture or meter. All it does is tell you what type of film you have, just like that. So you just adjust it, and it will tell me. So there's three different things on here. Right now, nothing, just a black line. That's for black and white. Then up at the top here it says color in white light. That I would assume is daylight lighting. And then color reversed in a black space. I would assume that to be indoor color film. You can see it has two rows here, one for ASA and one for DIN. DIN is obsolete, so any film you get now is going to be in ISO. ISO and ASA are the same thing. Here is an accessory shoe, and this is a good place where people would put things like a rangefinder to help ascertain the exact distance to a subject. Here's the light meter, and if you watch the light meter, it's responsive. It is 100% on, always on. So if you have one of these and you don't have the case, you should store it in something dark so that the light meter will turn off. The light meter works by a chemical reaction within the photocell here. So given enough time, the chemicals will have worn themselves out and the light meter will stop working. And if the light meter stops working, there's no replacing it and there's no fixing it. That is, if the light meter stops working because the chemical reaction has been completely expended. So a good idea for these, really store them inside something. Here we have the film advance lever, the frame count dial, the shutter release, and to adjust the frame count dial when you load the film, and we'll see this when we load the film, just have to rotate it in the direction of the arrow. And here on the front of the camera we have the meter window up here. So this is your light meter window. Here's the viewfinder window. This is what you look through when you take your picture. The brand and the model. Here's your flash PC port down here. This button right here is what you push to change the lenses, and in just a minute I'll show you how to swap out the front cell of the lenses on this camera. Here on this side is the shutter speed selector dial, V, X, and M. V is self-timer, X is X-type flash sync, and M is bulb sync. So just leave it in X because X and M, for all intents and purposes, function the same way but trigger different types of flashes. So if you ever want to use a flash and you have it in M, it won't sync correctly. So leave it in X, that's your best bet, except for when you want to use a self-timer, then switch it to V. Looking at the top of the lens, here we have the distance scale. You can see it rotating as I focus the lens on top of the front cell of the lens. Here are the shutter speeds, and this dial selects your shutter speed. Then behind the shutter speed indicate, and the red line right there tells me what shutter speed I've actually selected. And you'll notice that the shutter speed will not, that the camera will not allow you to select a shutter speed that is beyond the aperture range. And that's to make sure that you always get a proper exposure when you've lined up the light meter. Then behind that we have the aperture range. Here on the sides we have, this button is the aperture lock release, and this allows you to adjust the aperture. So to adjust the aperture you have to push this button in and then rotate the dial, and then it will click into place at a full stop. Going back to the front of the lens, what we see here is this triangle that tells you the point at which you're focused at. So right now I'm at 9. You'll have to trust me because you can't see that number, but that's focused at 9 feet. Now you'll see that going away from the focus point indicator, 4, 8, 11, 16, 22 in each direction, those are your apertures. Those are the numbers that correspond to that. And so what that's telling you is that at f4, everything from this mark to this mark will be in focus. At f22, everything from this mark to this mark will be in focus. So leaving it at 9, let's take a look at what that means. So at f2.8, 9 feet is in focus. At f4, everything from about 13 feet down to about 8 feet would be in focus. At f8, 15 to 6. At f11, 30 feet down to 5 feet. And then at f22, everything from slightly beyond infinity down to 4 feet would be in focus. And that's, so these indicators here are your depth of field indicators. At f16 and f22, that's really your hyperfocal distance, where basically everything is in focus. Camera's back doesn't have a whole lot of things. We've got the film back door right here. We've got the viewfinder right here. On the back of the, we also have the serial number. Where's the serial number? Oh, there it is. Embossed in the leather right here on the side with the film rewind knob is the serial number. I have no idea why Zeiss used to emboss the serial number in the leather. That's the worst place to do it. And then of course we have this little gizmo that, oh, God only knows what it does. God and the engineers, that's it. I sure don't. So now down here on the bottom of the camera we can see this tripod bushing and the film rewind button, and we also have an ASA setting dial. So as I mentioned up front, the the light meter is also ASA coupled, and this is where you will set your film ASA to adjust the light meter. So you can see there's this little button right here. It doesn't look like a button. It doesn't look like much of anything, but you'll have to trust me, it's a button. And then you've got your triangle here that indicates what the ISO is set to, and then 2 and 4. These 2 and 4 are marks for underexposing your film, so that if you want to push process it, if you wanted to use 40 ISO film as 160, you would know what settings you need to use. So to adjust the ISO, you're going to push down on this little button right here, and then rotate the dial at the same time. And that allows you to change the ISO. I'm going to try to do this. So watch the light meter. You can see when I adjust the ISO on the bottom, the light meter also responds. The match needle part of the light meter also responds. Let's give me a little bit more room here to play with. And so on the point of this is that on the bottom of the camera, you'll actually set your ISO for the light meter. On the top, you're simply setting a memo to remind you of what your film speed is. Now you'll notice as I adjusted these settings for the aperture that the triangle with the ASA mark moved. And it's important to know that your ASA, your film speed, your ISO, is not aligned with the bottom of the camera. It's aligned with that triangle. So right now I'm set to 80 ISO, not halfway between 20 and 40. Okay, so inside the camera, and to get into the back, you just pull down on that lever right there. And here we are inside of the Continamatic. So here is the film cassette chamber, and this is where you would put your fresh roll of film to load it. Here are 4 silver film guide rails. And what these outer 2 do is that as the film moves through it, they keep it from moving around so that it moves smoothly through the camera and that the image is centered in the proper location on the film. Here we have the inner guide rails, and these help to sandwich the film with the film pressure plate, which we'll see in a second, to make sure that it's flat on plane. This area inside is the camera obscura. As you can see, there's the lens in the back, and the shutter for the camera is actually built into the lens. Here is the film the film tension sprocket rather. The film tension sprocket helps prevent the film from being pulled back into the cassette. Now, the film is spooled up in here, and so it builds up a memory like a spring. So it wants to pull the film back into it. This prevents that from happening. This also advances when you advance the film, helping to make sure that the film is pulled through the camera in a uniform and even manner. Here's the film take-up spool, and this is where the film goes after you've taken the picture. Going to the back door of the camera, here's a film guide reel roller, and what that does is that rests right here to help make sure that the film has enough tension on it to stay attached to the sprocket. This is the film pressure plate that I mentioned, and this sandwiches the film with these inner silver guide rails to keep it flat. And these little nubs actually serve a purpose. They help keep the film cassette in place so that the film comes off of it in proper alignment. While we've got the back of the camera open, let's load and unload film, and I'll show you what happens, the process for this and what happens inside your camera. So to load the film, you simply grab your roll of film and slide it into the film cassette chamber and put the film rewind knob back in place. Now we're going to pull out a leader and load it into the film take-up spool. And the film take-up spool has a little catch on it to help keep the film in place, and that's pretty darn nice. It's something I wish every camera had. And we're going to activate the shutter and advance the film. And you'll notice that this camera, unlike many cameras, especially many high-end SLRs, advances the film so it keeps the same coil as the film cassette spool, something I find to be preferable because it doesn't put the film under any tension that it hasn't already been under. So let's do that again. You'll see here how the film comes out of the camera and is guided by these 2 guide rails to the sprocket, which in conjunction with the film take-up spool pulls it the proper distance to expose each frame. Now once you have the film loaded, I'm going to close the back. The next thing we need to do is reset this so that the triangle is at 37 like that. Now you can only rotate this in the direction of the arrow. If you try to rotate it the other way, you're going to end up with a broken frame counter. Let's advance this now until it's at 0 or 1. I'm going to advance it 3 times to where it's at 0. That's fine. Now we're going to set the ISO reminder dial to, let's pretend that this is 160 ISO. You'll notice that this is an old scale for film speeds, 10, 20, 40, 80, 120, 160, 320, instead of the 25, 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, and so on that we've seen now. And that's just a factor of the way that the standards have changed. And the film speed itself, 320 film today is the same as 320 film in 1955. Now we need to make sure, however, that the light meter knows that we're going to use 160 ISO film. So let's go to the bottom here. And we're going to line up the 160 with that triangle. Now we're ready to go. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to swap lenses on this camera. And it's a bit fiddly. I wouldn't do this like on a bridge over a ravine. But you push down on this button, and now you've got to rotate this. Come on, there it goes. You rotate it the same direction as focus until it comes out. And now this is your 45mm lens. Now there's another element in there that works as a part of the other 2 lenses, and I forget what the other 2 lenses are. There's a wide angle and a telephoto. I want to say they're 28 and 100mm or something like that. So if you're swapping out lenses, now you would take your other lens, and to put it in, you find the red dot on the mounting flange right there. Line it up with the red dot of the release button, and just rotate it just like you're focusing it until this pops back in place. I'll show you that one more time so you can see what we're looking for. Red dot to red dot. Now watch this lever as it locks into place. So you heard it and tink and pop forward. Now we know that it's locked. It's not going to come out. So that's how you switch lenses. Let's run through the whole process of taking a picture with this camera, and then I'm going to show you how the film, some more of how the film works inside, and I'll show you how to unload it and rewind it. Now remember, if you're unfamiliar with film cameras, once the film is loaded in the camera, you cannot open the back of the camera until you've rewound it. Film is one and done. So when I open up the back of this in a minute, the film will not be rewound. Don't replicate that, because this film is just for demonstration. So to use the shutter, now we've got a light meter reading all the time, and this is a little bit too underexposed right now. The goal of using the light meter is to get this white needle to line up with the circle in the other needle. So you can't actually move the white needle, you just have to move the needle with the circle in it. Now there we go. With this lighting inside my home at 1/8 of a second, the proper aperture is about f something or another, f16. That's it. And you can see I changed the shutter speed up to 1/300th at f2.8, and this doesn't change because the amount of light reaching the camera at 1/300th at f2.8 is the same as the light reaching it at 1/60th at f5.6, 1/8 at f16, or 1/4 at f22. It's always the exact same amount of light. So that's how this light meter works. All you have to do is get the needle to line up, both of them like that, and then you just choose what shutter speed and aperture combination you would like. So it's pretty intuitive once you've figured it out. It's just figuring it out can be a little bit tricky. So now we know we have the proper shutter speed. We're going to call this the proper shutter speed at 1/125th and f4. Okay, fantastic. So now our subject is 9 feet away. We're going to go to the 9, and we know it's 9 feet because we got out a laser measure and took a reading. No, we're guessing it's 9 feet. It's close enough. At f4, everything from 13 feet down to about 8 feet is in focus. So if we guess that they're 9 to 10 feet away, no problem. They're going to be in focus. Just took the picture, advanced the film, and that's it. That's the entire process. So let's take a look at how the shutter works a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk about this in regards to the shutter types. So we've got V, X, and M. So as I mentioned before, there are three different shutter settings, V, X, and M. X is the one to keep it in because it takes the picture right then, and it uses modern flashes. M will function the same way if you don't have a flash. It will take the picture right then. It affects the way that the flashes are timed, M versus X. Now I would love to show you V, which is self-timer. One of the great things about old cameras is that not all of the functions work properly all the time. So either I'm missing a self-timer lever on this camera, which is always possible, or my self-timer simply doesn't work. Because for whatever reason, I've never figured out how to get this self-timer to work, and that's fine. Old self-timers are unreliable and a great way to jam your camera if they stop working halfway through the countdown. Oh yeah, here it is. I've got a note in my script. Self-timer does not work on my camera. So the way that the self-timer is supposed to work, if you have one that works, note that the shutter speed, when you set the shutter speed to B for bulb, the self-timer will not work. So what happens is if you set it to B, the self-timer will trigger the shutter as though it were in X sync mode. So to activate the self-timer, the first thing you need to do is cock the shutter. And what you do to cock the shutter is simply you advance the film, if you haven't already. The next thing you do is switch the self-timer shutter to V, and then you take the exposure, and it's supposed to go and count down and then take the picture like that. But like I said, it doesn't work on mine. So the next thing let's do is let's get this film out of this camera. Now, remember, if this was real life and you had actual film in this camera, you would not do what I'm about to do, which is open the back of the camera. But I want to show you what happens when you rewind the film in this camera. To rewind it, you first push down on the film rewind button here, and then as you start to rewind, the knob elevates but keeps rewinding the film. That's a pretty neat engineering trick. Then just rewind it. And it rewinds pretty quickly considering it's got a knob and not a lever. And here's the sound that will let you know that the film's been removed from the take-up spool. When you're rewinding the film, you'd rewind it completely into the cassette, and then you would open up the film back and remove the cassette. I leave a leader on here so I can use this film again in future videos. Okay, here we are looking through the viewfinder of the camera, and as you can see, there's the outside of the frame, and inside of the frame there are two sets of reflective lines. So let's say you've got the 45mm lens that comes with the camera equipped. You would use this outer box right here, the larger one. Those inner four corners are for use with the 75mm lens that can be added on instead of the 45. Now the whole box does not cover the same area as the 30mm wide angle lens that was available for this camera. That lens included a special adapter that went right here on the accessory shoe. There is one thing to know about viewfinders, and that is that they don't have what's called parallax correction. So let's take this scene, let's pretend that this is an actual scene. Here's the camera, here's the viewfinder, here's your subject, okay? So these are fairly closely lined up, but the viewfinder is going to see an angle about like this. The camera is going to see an angle about like that. So in your viewfinder, this subject right now is lined up so that the center of this spool is in the center of the viewfinder. However, with the camera lens, the top of the spool is lined up with the center of the camera lens. So if your subject is less than about 8 feet away, you'll need to do some parallax correction. And there's no hard and fast rule for that, but just to sort of eyeball and guess at how much correction you need. Clearly, if you are as close to the subject as you can be, which is a little bit short of 4 feet, there's going to be a big error between what's in the viewfinder and what's in the camera lens. But if you're beyond 8 feet, there won't really be a noticeable error. So So this is the principle of parallax, the difference between what goes into the center of your lens and what goes into the center of your viewfinder. So just be aware that you'll have to adjust how you hold the camera to bring it more in line with the viewfinder when you actually take the picture if your subject is less than 8 feet from you. So some notes and things on this camera. Remember that the light meter is purely a chemical reaction, so to keep it in the dark. Great news is the camera does not use batteries, so there's no batteries to leak in it and no batteries to forget or buy. The light meter will lose accuracy if it is constantly barraged with light for years on end, and there is a finite amount of lifetime in this light meter. In my mind, this is one of the most truly beautiful cameras, and I believe this camera belongs in front of a lens being photographed as much as it does behind a lens taking photos. In addition to taking fantastic photos, it is simply a very attractive little camera. And also I'll note that the lens here, this f2.8 45mm Pantar, is a top-notch lens. It is sharp and contrasty even by today's lens standards. You could do a whole lot worse for photos than this lens and this camera. So there are a couple of things not to do with this camera. Don't touch the shutter. Obviously, you'd have to take the camera apart to do that, but avoid touching the shutter. Also, avoid touching the lens elements. Be careful not to touch the glass of the viewfinder too much. Don't leave your camera or the lens elements, if you have the additional 75mm and 30mm lenses in your car, because that's a good way for heat and cold to damage them. It can bring lubricating oils, it can make them thin, and then they get into places they're not supposed to. The heat and the cold can damage the light meter. Extreme cold can cause lubricating oils to break down and become gummy. In any case, leaving a camera like this in your car is a great way to destroy it very quickly, or have it get stolen. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box, because moisture will get in there and it will cause fungus to grow. Do not let your camera get wet. That's a good way to have internal components rust and get seized up and be ruined, and for water to get in the viewfinder and ruin it. It's not weather sealed. It's an old camera. They didn't weather seal them back in the day. Just remember that your camera is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thank you very much for watching my video on the Zeiss Ikon Continamatic II. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm making content which is helpful and useful to you. If you have any questions or thoughts about this camera or suggestions for future videos, please leave those in the comments section. I'm pretty good about responding fairly quickly. If you have ideas for future videos, please let me know, and if I have the equipment and technical know-how, I'm more than happy to make those. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, you can do that, and you'll find out when I have more videos about cameras being released. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching, and take great photos.